You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible. A former governor of Massachusetts, two-term governor, announced late in 2019 that he was going to seek the Democratic nomination for president. Barely showing up in the polls, but he makes it perfectly clear he is in this thing to win it. I had a chance to talk with him earlier today. Here's our conversation. Well, Governor Deval, Patrick, glad to have you on Roland Martin Unfiltered.
Good to be with you. Thank you. Happy New Year.
So when you and I talked at the NAACP convention last year, I specifically asked you whether or not you were going to run. You hedged on that very issue.
Well, people are asking, oh, my goodness, is he going to run? Are you thinking about it or are you talking about it? Just your thoughts about potentially 2020.
Well, look, I'm not running today. I'm here because
Except to catch a plane at 5:30.
Yeah, right. I do have to run soon. I've got a great new business where we're doing impact investing, and I'm focused on that. And I've got a great team and some investors and a team and some companies we've invested in who are depending on us and depending on me to be engaged in that. And I'm trying to be involved in the midterms because I think it's a critical cycle.
Meaning campaigning across the country for different folks.
Yeah, and we've identified a small number of campaigns where I've been invited and where I think I can be helpful, and I can do that consistent with my day job, and that's my focus for now.
And all of a sudden, 20 plus candidates got in the race, and January and February and months going, and then all of a sudden, very late in 2019, you just have to jump in. Why?
Well, we were ready to go more than a year before, and about 3 weeks before our announcement date, my wife, Diane, was diagnosed with cancer. And that's the sort of thing that just brings your feet back to earth, Roland. We paid attention to her and to that. I'm very, very grateful that when we celebrated 35 years of marriage in May, she's cancer-free. We continue to watch a race with a lot of talent in it and a lot of time and a lot of money, but where the leader still is somebody called undecided. And I think that folks are undecided because we're at risk of missing a moment where we can do more than get rid of the current president, but really reinvent America so that prosperity and justice is available to everybody everywhere. And that's been a lot of my life's work, as I think you know. And I believe that I have a unique range of life and leadership experience to deliver on that.
What you're dealing with, though, is you're dealing with candidates who've had a significant head start. If this was a marathon, you are probably a couple of laps down in terms of, obviously, it's a fundraiser. You look at the polling, not being able to get in any of these debates. And so when it comes to your plan, I mean, what exactly are you looking at? Is Iowa and New Hampshire off the table? Are you focused on South Carolina and states after that? Exactly what is your strategy to be able to make an impact on this race?
Well, let me talk first about some of your sort of prerequisite observations. You are right about a lot of it, but it is also true that folks have been in for a long time, spent a lot of money, and nobody's locked it down. 60-70% of the people in each of the early 4 states are undecided. And for them, I am not late. And in fact, of the folks who say they are decided, who are reflected in that poll, in the polls that we see, about a third of them say they'd be willing to change their mind. So I've been at events in New Hampshire and in South Carolina where we have spent most of our time, and also in Iowa and Nevada where people say, you know what, I've been waiting for you. I'm ready to help. And we're building fast. We're raising to be competitive. We'll never have as much as Bloomberg. But I hope we're not at a point where you can just buy a seat in the Oval Office. I think we've got to earn it. And I think a record of delivering results, not just plans, but results, and a life experience that is about the American dream will make a difference. So we're respectful of the calendar. We have a presence in all of the early states, but specifically to your question, we're really bearing down in New Hampshire, where I'm really reintroducing myself, and here in South Carolina. That's where you'll see me mostly over the next several weeks.
Obviously, Senator Kamala Harris was in the race. She's dropped out. Senator Cory Booker is still in, but is lagging significantly in polling as well as in money. Former HUD Secretary Julian Castro has dropped out of the race as well. Many people have been, especially a lot of African Americans, have been talked about the lack of diversity there when it comes at the top of this race as well.
Right.
And so, how are you going to make the case, especially to black voters in South Carolina, who are making up a significant number of the voters in that primary, that you are a better choice than Vice President Joe Biden, Senator Bernie Sanders, Mayor Pete Buttigieg, and some of the other candidates?
Well, look, these are all good people, and many of them are friends of mine, Roland, as they are of yours. But I'm not about yesterday. I'm about tomorrow. I'm not about being angry. I'm as angry as I am. I'm about what we can do to unify the country and what is necessary to do to unify the country so that we can deliver on the transformative policy proposals that many of us have. I'm not about plans. I'm about results. And so I do agree with you that that we have a problem in our field of having some of the most talented and diverse candidates dropping out. I'm in it to win it. And it happens, as I said earlier, that this diverse candidate has the range of life and leadership experience that is uniquely suited for this moment. So I got to get out there, right? I got to talk to people, got to meet people. In the case of New Hampshire, I'm reintroducing myself. In the case of South Carolina, in many cases, I'm introducing myself because I haven't been as active here since the 2008 race with for Barack Obama, or my civil rights work in the years before that. And I am finding people are very open because, as I said, you know, other candidates have been in a long time, but they haven't locked it down.
Obviously, Senator Elizabeth Warren is also one of the front runners. She is from your state, Massachusetts,
Yes.
United States Senator. When you announced, you said you had to make a very difficult call to her. Obviously, having two folks from Massachusetts in the presidential race is difficult. We saw the same thing in Texas. Beto O'Rourke and Julian Castro, both of them no longer in the race as well. And so, what exactly is, when you look at this field,
Yes.
what exactly is your space? What is your lane? What area do you occupy that you believe has not been spoken to by any of these other candidates, including Senator Warren?
Well, all of us have policy proposals around reforming big systems, right? Healthcare, immigration, criminal justice. That's incredibly important. I will say, you know, we delivered healthcare to 99% of the residents of Massachusetts. Nobody else, no other state can touch that. For me, it's not an abstraction. This is about outcomes. The same is true in criminal justice. It's not an abstraction. It's about what we've done. But no one else, as far as I can tell, is talking about the importance of growing the economy so that it reaches out to the middle and the marginalized and not just up to the well-connected. And that is critical. We can't just be about distribution. We have to also redistribution. We have to be about how we create an economy where there is a place for people when they are out of school and ready to go to work. And so that we have a place for folks who are being displaced by the changes in the style and strategy of our economy. That's work I've done in Massachusetts as well. 25-year employment high coming out of recession. That's no joke. And that wasn't by accident.
You talked about the issue of the economy. Just the other day, we did a story on Roland Unfiltered regarding artificial intelligence potentially impacting upwards of 30% of black men,
Right.
4.5 million jobs predicted lost. When you look at what is happening in terms of black businesses, we now have 700,000 more, 2.6 million than we did 8 years ago.
Right.
The problem is they're doing half the revenue they were doing beforehand.
That's right.
But when it comes to African Americans, how do you make the case? What will you say is your agenda that will excite a black voter to pick you over the other candidates?
So first of all, Roland, I think the innovation economy is something that America can own, not be afraid of, but own. We got to be intentional about it in terms of training and retraining, about pushing out the opportunities from the centers where it's concentrated today, like Boston or San Francisco. We can do that. I've seen models of that. We did some of this work in Massachusetts. I think specifically to Black people, Black workers, Black entrepreneurs, we need to make capital available for people. We need an ownership approach in many communities so that people can begin to build generational wealth. And when I say capital, I'm not talking about just access to loans. That's one thing. I get that. But I'm talking about the ownership interests that enable people to have a stake in the thing they're trying to build, and some coaching and mentorship so they can understand that they're not the first ones having to deal with the problems that go with building a business. There's some wonderful strategies out there. We can harness these, we can scale these, and we can make entrepreneurship, the whole idea of starting and building a business and employing others, a part of the ethic in our own communities that it has been in the past. I think that's enormously important. I think that the federal government can contribute to that in really important ways.
What about housing? Look, Black home ownership is at its lowest rate since the Fair Housing Act was passed and signed in 1968. We lost 53% of Black wealth due to the home foreclosure crisis in 2007, 2008, in the following years. What is your plan there? Because that is where, first of all, most Americans have been able to build wealth, been able to own property, pass it on. We're actually going backwards. What is your plan there?
So we have an opportunity agenda, Roland. I should have started by framing it this way, which is about investing in education, innovation, and infrastructure. And the reason I talk about it that way is that in my experience, most people don't make their decisions or live their lives in policy silos. It's at the interconnection of policy. And so making sure there's a great school from pre-K right up through public higher ed within reach of everybody, affordable at the higher ed and workforce training level, that innovation, as I was talking about earlier, is spread out. So that folks have an opportunity to participate in the innovation economy globally. By the way, absolutely dependent on other infrastructure investments like access to high-speed broadband, adequate cell service. Some of the things that government has to do enable people help themselves. And housing is a part of that as well. It's not, interestingly, my kids' generation, they're much more interested, they say, in renting than in owning. I want them to be interested in owning, and I want them to think about owning in places where that are on the come, if you will. I mean, I'm thinking about, for example, what's happening in my old neighborhood on the south side of Chicago because the Obama presidential senator is going in. And you better believe all these developers are circling around thinking this neighborhood is about to pop. Well, how come folks in the community today don't have a stake in that future? And how do we build that? There's some wonderful strategies that I've looked at and worked on to help with that. That's how we create generational wealth.
And when you also look at when you talk about education, we
Yes.
look at the issue of student loan debt. African Americans have more student loan debt than anyone else. Are you in alignment with other candidates who believe that the federal government should cancel that student loan debt? And also, where do you stand on the issue of free tuition for college, but also school choice, charter schools, vouchers? Those three issues.
You're going to put all that in one question?
Well, you can certainly expand on it.
Yeah.
A three-part question.
I think Roland, first of all, the point about relieving student debt is critical because it's choking off the ability of so many young people to pursue their dreams. I think I'd accomplish it differently. I don't favor the wealth tax, mostly because I don't think wealth is the problem. I think greed is the problem. But I do favor raising the estate tax, which is a different way of accomplishing similar things and using those kinds of one-time revenues to eliminate existing student debt. By the way, we can get at a lot of that just by refinancing to current interest rates at or near zero and crediting what has been paid against unpaid principal. In many cases, that's going to eliminate the debt right there. I'm trying to explore whether that's something we can do without legislation. That's a start. But the go forward is a separate problem, how to make higher ed affordable for folks who are in school or about to enter school. And I think the big issue there in public colleges and universities is that we've been draining the public out of public colleges and universities. The public contribution, I think here in South Carolina, is about 10%. Before I was governor in Massachusetts, it was down to 25–30%. Just raising that back home, back to a 50% level was enough to freeze tuition and fees. If we actually want to make it truly affordable for folks, then I think we got to put the public right back up at 100%. I would make it free for those who give a year or 2 or 3 in national service, military or civilian. And I'm interested in that, not just as a strategy for relieving people of higher ed costs, but because, frankly, it's easy to divide us today because we don't know each other. And we need a way to learn about each other, that more than the cartoon version we get about people who are different from us in different parts of the country. And I think service is a terrific and proven way to get at that.
And where do you come down on charter schools and vouchers?
You know, vouchers I'm deeply skeptical of, I will tell you. Charter schools, I think, have a place. But I don't think they are a substitute for public education. You know, this is another area where the public's been backing away from public schools. We were #1 in student achievement in Massachusetts in a heavily unionized environment. So it's not teachers' unions that are the problem. But what we had was a consistent achievement gap. And the kids, Roland, who were stuck in that gap were poor kids, kids who spoke English as a second language or who had special needs. And those are our kids too, right? So we got together all of these different interests in education, folks who frequently wouldn't sit down at the same table together, confirming my view that the greatest power a governor or a president has is the convening power. And we put together a suite of strategies, knowing from teachers that one size wasn't going to fit all, that different populations of kids and different individual kids needed different solutions. And we put some money behind that and some accountability behind that. And examples of schools that were once thought of as the worst in Boston went to the best in the state, because attention was paid and there was a strategy that met those kids where they are. I think that's how we have to think about the federal government's role and government's role generally in public schools.
A few more questions. In 2012, another Massachusetts governor, a former governor, Mitt Romney, ran. He was tarred and feathered with working at Bain Capital by Democrats, by progressives. You spent time there. You left there when you announced you're running for president. How are you going to deal with that when you have a Democratic constituency they're very progressive, that is highly critical of private equity companies, their impact? You talk about greed. That's one of the issues that Senator Elizabeth Warren has talked about. How are you going to deal with that, knowing full well that that's a bullseye that's on you?
Look, I'm really proud of the work we did. I started a fund at Bain Capital to invest in companies for social and environmental impact, and I wanted to demonstrate that you didn't have to trade return for responsible business behavior, which has been a bugaboo out there in our capitalism for a long time. We invested in companies, for example, that divert green waste from landfills where it would otherwise create methane gas, and instead recycled it and sold it as composted soil and ground cover. And another company that delivered highly effective, high quality, and highly dignified dental services to poor kids, which is a huge gap in our healthcare system, a scalable solution. We invested in another company that was creating IT hubs in hollowed out urban centers where to take advantage of the outsourcing of IT, but at a lower price point that was competitive with overseas companies and was catalyzing economic activity in cities and towns. That's exactly the kind of capitalism we want to promote. And companies like that are meeting and addressing new trends and how people eat and how they dress themselves and how they engage in the private sector need capital to scale too. I'm really, really proud of that work because, you know, I'm a capitalist. I'm not a market fundamentalist. I don't think markets solve every issue right on time in everybody's life. But I do think we have practiced a kind of a short-term focused, narrow, and frankly sometimes destructive kind of capitalism for the last 30 or 40 years, and it doesn't have to be that way.
Do want to ask you what's happening in current events, what's happening in Iran and Iraq. Donald Trump made the decision to take out one of the top Iranian generals. Many other Democratic candidates have been critical of that decision-making process, saying it could destabilize the Middle East. Your thoughts on that action by the Trump administration and what may very well happen next?
You know, Roland, it's so interesting that you even describe it as a decision-making process. That's part of the problem. This is an impulsive president, and it appears he's made another impulsive decision. You know, I totally support and believe that America has the right to defend our interests anywhere, anytime. But I think that right has to be bound by international norms, by law, and by forethought. And there has been no indication that this president has any interest in any of those boundaries, which is why we all have so little confidence that this decision was thought out and the consequences of it were considered. So now we're dealing with a less safe military on the ground, less safe allies on the ground and elsewhere, more threats to American interests and to American people. And we're here in South Carolina, close to Fort Jackson, where some half of the Army are trained. You got to know that those servicemen and women and their families are deeply concerned about how carelessly this president has put their lives and future in jeopardy. And I can only say that as president, expect a more sober and thoughtful approach to our place in the world than we've seen in the last little while, frankly, in the last 3 years.
2 questions left. First off, you head up the Civil Rights Division under President Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
When you look at Donald Trump, he touts the First Step Act. They really are polling around 15% among black men. The White House wants to get that number to 20%. There are no black women are not going to support him in any way at all. Your assessment of Donald Trump and civil rights, and how do you make the appeal specifically to black men to support your candidacy? Because that is an issue. There was a 9-point gap between black men and black women. For Obama and Romney, there was a 13-point gap between black men and black women, Trump versus Hillary Clinton. How do you make the case to black men that they should support your candidacy?
So, you know, Roland, when I talked earlier about the numbers of people I meet who feel unseen and unheard, who aren't captured in polls, you know, that I think that feeling is acute among black men. You know, we've been warehousing our brothers for a long time now, and kind of looking the other way. Not anymore. We've been dealing with, and I dealt in the Civil Rights Division with excessive force by police. Now it's captured on videotape. And by the way, it's one of those false choices, right? We got to warehouse black men, or else we can't be safe. You gotta hate the police to believe Black Lives Matter. None of that is true. It's not true. We are more safe if we are smarter in response to crime. We are more safe and more secure and more thoughtful if we are preparing people to join a mainstream economy that actually has a place for them and acts like it has a place for them. And that's not just true of people coming out. I'm talking about, kids growing up in my own neighborhood who stay out of jail and try to do the right thing, but don't get their chance. So how we make that chance available, how we make it real, this is why I think this is critical, right? We can't keep having cycles where folks come and make these kinds of promises and then we don't deliver. There are reasons why people feel disaffected and unseen and unheard. It's because they are unseen and unheard. And I have lived my whole professional life trying to make sure that folks just like that didn't feel that way and had a reason to believe.
President Barack Obama appointed Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court. I was very vocal in calling, saying that he should nominate an African-American woman, a historic appointment to the Supreme Court. He didn't do so. He chose Garland. We've never had a black woman nominated to the Supreme Court. If you become president and you get your first Supreme Court nomination, would you make that an African-American woman?
There's a lot to like about that, Roland. I nominated and placed on our courts, on our highest court in Massachusetts, the first African-American man as Chief Justice and the first African-American woman on that court. And they were some of the best appointments I was able to make. So you better believe I have that very much on my mind and heart.
All right, Governor Deval Patrick, we appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Roland. Thanks for having me.
All right, folks, that's just one of the presidential candidates. We've had, of course, others on the show. Of course, we had Julian Castro as well as Kamala Harris. They've dropped out, but also Senator Elizabeth Warren, Senator Bernie Sanders. And we're talking to the Sanders camp right now, as well as the Biden camp and others, to get those candidates right here on Roland Martin Unfiltered. And that's why we do what we do, because we want to be able to give an unfiltered perspective, to hear from them directly as it relates to what they're going to do if they are president. And you need to hear directly from them. There's about a 25-minute interview there. Not quite sure in terms of the time they spend these other networks, but I think it's important for us to have platforms that speak to our issues.
All right, folks, back to that Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment.
All right, folks, you've heard me talk a lot about marijuanastock.org. Why? Because I want to keep you informed of potential investment opportunities. We've all watched the growth of the cannabis industry. Of course, a recent report by New Frontier Data estimates the global cannabis market at more than $340 billion. Also, places like Illinois, where they simply just made it legal to purchase marijuana, you're seeing it expand across the nation. Now, marijuana has a good cousin, the hemp plant, with a much higher concentration of CBD. That means hemp gives you all the medical benefits of marijuana without getting you high. Hemp farming is now legal in the United States as a result of the 2018 Farm Bill, thus creating one of the largest commodities worldwide. It's very simple. They're going to need land to grow all the plants, and this is where the folks at 420 Real Estate come in. Their business model is very simple. They buy land that supports hemp CBD grow operations and lease it to licensed, high-paying tenants. That's right, they are hemp CBD landlords, and you can get in on the action by going to marijuanastock.org, and that is you can have a minimal investment of $200 up to $10,000. Again, $200 up to $10,000. To invest, go to marijuanastock.org. That's marijuanastock.org. Get in the game and get in the game now.
Now back to your Roland Martin Unfiltered video.